Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a beautiful princess named Snow White. Snow White's stepmother, the queen, was jealous of her beauty. She owned a magic mirror. One day, the queen asked the mirror, "Who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "Snow White is the fairest of them all." Furious, the queen ordered a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and kill her. The huntsman led Snow White deep into the forest. But the huntsman couldn't bear to harm her, so he let her go and told her to flee. Snow White, lost and afraid, wandered deeper into the forest. Soon she stumbled upon a small cottage hidden among the trees. Snow White knocked on the door and entered the cottage. Inside, she found the cottage was messy and small but charming. Snow White decided to clean the cottage and cook a meal to thank whoever lived there. As night fell, the owners of the cottage, 7 dwarfs, returned home from work in the mines. When they entered the cottage, they were surprised to find it so clean and smelled something delicious. They found Snow White sleeping on their beds, exhausted from cleaning. The dwarfs woke her gently, and she explained her story. The kind-hearted dwarfs offered her a place to stay. Meanwhile, the queen discovered from her mirror that Snow White was still alive. The queen decided to take matters into her own hands and create a poisoned apple. The next day, Snow White helped the dwarfs prepare for their day at the mines. The dwarfs warned Snow White not to talk to strangers while they were away. The queen, disguised as an old peddler woman, made her way to the cottage. She knocked on the cottage door, offering Snow White a beautiful red apple. Snow White hesitated but eventually took a bite of the apple. As soon as she bit into the apple, Snow White fell into a deep, death-like sleep. The queen cackled in triumph and disappeared into the forest. When the dwarfs returned, they found Snow White lying lifeless on the floor. They were heartbroken and laid her in a glass coffin, unable to bury her beauty. Days passed, and the dwarfs kept watch over her. One day, a prince who had heard of Snow White's beauty came to visit her. The prince was so captivated by Snow White's beauty that he kissed her. The kiss broke the spell, and Snow White awoke from her deep sleep. The dwarfs cheered with joy, overjoyed that Snow White was alive. Snow White thanked the prince and the dwarfs for their love and care. Snow White and the prince fell in love at first sight. The prince asked Snow White to return with him to his kingdom. Snow White accepted, and they prepared to leave the cottage. The dwarfs were sad to see her go, but happy that she found happiness. Snow White promised to visit the dwarfs often and never forget them. Snow White and the prince rode off to his kingdom. The queen, unaware of Snow White's revival, believed she had won. But when she asked the mirror who was the fairest, the mirror again said Snow White. The queen's fury was so great that she smashed the mirror in anger. Snow White and the prince arrived at his grand palace. The kingdom welcomed Snow White as their new princess. A grand wedding was held for Snow White and the prince. Snow White and the prince lived happily ever after. The dwarfs often visited Snow White in the palace. The Snow White never forgot the kindness of the dwarfs, and they all lived happily ever after.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to visit us again. Before you go, please subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to like and share the video.